in. And I know that in our group of friends, people have lost half their churches over that issue. We only lost about 20%, which is still painful and still hurtful. And people I loved walked out the door, and it sucks. And
I think you're right. I think it's not just about the issue of LGBTQ inclusion. It's about what do we think the Bible is, and what role does the Bible play?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is our posture with it? And I think that the Bible is the central sticking point. And I think people would say that people like you and I don't value the Bible, but I want to push back and say, I value it. I take it very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think I can obviously tell you do too.
Oh yeah. And that's, I love that. Like I've told people over and over again, I think the Bible is the issue. It's the singular issue that drives all these other progressive elements, is how do we understand the Bible? And for me, I feel like what my accusation against the evangelicals is they move the needle on inspiration to the side of almost dictation theory, that the Bible just kind of dropped from the sky as God's instruction manual. And what I appreciate, especially about Rob Bell's book, What is the Bible?, that came out last fall, I love that he pulls the needle, and maybe too far, back the other way to say that it's a human book about God. But it's super important because this is the ideas people had about God. Did you see, by the way, there's a new movie, a new Samson movie?
We went to see Justice League.
Yeah.
It was in the preview.
Really?
Trailer. The Samson movie trailer. Yeah.
And I saw it on a trailer on Facebook, and the person I saw posting it said something like, you understand, Samson is a terrorist. It's told from the other side. The only reason he's not a terrorist is because of who's telling the story.
Yep.
And so like maybe we should read that story in a lens as their experience of God. Like they thought God was like this, almost like the Abraham-Isaac story. Like Abraham didn't find it weird to take his son up on the mountain and kill him. That's not the plot twist. That's not we get hung up on that. That's not a thing for them. Like, oh yeah, that's what you do.
Yeah.
The plot twist is, God's not like that. Like,
right.
Like what do I do? How do I? And so that's been really fun for me, and has really kind of driven me back to Scripture to say, man, this is really exciting and fun to read. Oh, I need to give you credit. You recommended a book. You didn't recommend a book. You had a picture of a book that got me really excited. I was just looking to see if I have it around here. Marcus Borg's Evolving the Word.
Oh, the word. Oh, yeah, the evolution of the word.
Evolution of the word.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that.
Right?
Yeah, you had it in a stack because lectionary is going through Mark, and you had a stack of your resources.
Yep.
And I saw it on Facebook, and I was like, "Oh, what's that one? I like Marcus Borg," so I ordered it. And it's the same thing. It's like I care about it more. It's more exciting to me to dig in and see. Like, I feel like there's, in some ways, I'm more excited about Bible conversations these days than I ever have.
That's what I try to tell people is like my passion for the Bible has actually grown, but my passion for understanding it as a product of these people who lived, anywhere of like 2,000 to 5,000 years ago or whatever, who had real experiences that drove them to, whether they created parables, created stories, or told things that happened to them. And they wrote these things down to express, like, we had these experiences, and it wasn't intended to take away from our experiences, right? So that we wouldn't have them.
Right.
And I don't expect a person from that era to when they think that this earth is the center of the universe and possibly supported on pillars, understand where the universe came from.
Correct.
As if we even really can. So it's just allowing it to be what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love about Borg's book is like, I think about how much of yours and my ideas evolved in the last 10 years. Then let's understand that Paul's doing the same thing when he's writing the epistles. Yep. So we shouldn't hold Romans and 1 Thessalonians together and say, what's a comprehensive view of Paul? No.
Paul changes.
1 Thessalonians was written here. Romans was written a decade at least later. Paul's changing his ideas. His ideas are always evolving, and it's okay to let them stand in tension to each other. And that's really, really interesting. So I'm sorry, we got down a rabbit trail.
I love this because I think it's so important. We're studying the Gospel of Mark through Easter, and we are doing a discussion group on it on Sunday night. And, trying to not synergize all the other Gospels with Mark, because that muddies Mark's story.
Yep.
And there's a time to maybe compare and see what changed. But the idea is Mark is telling Mark's story, or Matthew's telling Matthew's, and letting them tell their story.
Yep.
Even, I mean, we're going to jump into the resurrection. I'm going to do a series on the resurrection stories. They're very different.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to figure out how they're the same, is saying, no, they're giving us their idea of Jesus, of who Jesus is through these stories.
Yeah. And the church fathers in their wisdom, they saw the discrepancies and they were okay with it.
Yep.
Like, yeah, we know it doesn't only, I mean, I feel like it's, again, the product of modern thought where we have to synergize everything that doesn't let those stories breathe and be what they are. Because throughout church history, people have been like, oh, they say different things. Okay.
Yep. I think we have to feel like we have to prove something. We have to prove this is valid because it all says the same thing, as opposed to we're being invited into a generous conversation.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's a whole you know.
Yeah. And frankly, they're just more fun to teach when you let them speak for themselves. You know, I think they're so much more fun to teach, and they're so much more interesting when you're stop trying to round out the edges all the time and just let them be kind of woolly and kind of quirky. So,
yeah. Oh, that's so good, man.
Yeah.
So you started the church. You guys have gone through the process of inclusion.
Yes.
And I imagine over the 10 years, there are lots of things that have been like that, painful in a way, but also knowing that you were taking steps that were on the right side of history.
Yeah, I feel like that was obviously the one that felt like bumpy. I think everything else has felt pretty, and I know this isn't everyone's experience, but I've been very, very fortunate, and I'm very grateful that most of those things have felt pretty smooth in our church, because again, we started early on with that kind of generous orthodoxy, and so everything else felt mostly smooth and still does. There's bumpy moments, but I feel like they're pretty short, you know, and they're nothing. That one was a kind of a line in the sand that I think people had come to our church thinking we were something. And it was funny even going through that, because I'd have people say like, but you've said, you know, this and this and this and this. And I would say like, yeah, exactly. And they're like, well, it's so obvious. I'm like, I think so too. But you know how it is. Some people just hadn't played out well, if he said this, then it also applies to that. You know, if there's room for me to think what I think, then there's also room for them to think what they think. And
I was talking to a guy from our church recently, and I've heard this before from people, where they say, you know, sometimes people will just freak out over something I've said 100 times.
Yes.
And I'll be like, I've said this 100 times, and they've been in the room, in a seat, and I've said this. And they're like, oh yeah, but they heard it today.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a friend who used to come up to me once in a while. He's moved away, but he'd come up to me once in a while and he'd say like, he'd look around the room. He'd like, did anybody hear what you said today? Because if they did, there should be a line up here to talk to you, and nobody is. I was like, I don't think they hear it most of the time. I don't think they hear the implications. They don't think through like, well, if he's saying this, then he's also saying the next thing. I don't think people hear all that. And part of it is because I know about you. I've watched you preach a little bit online, and you're funny, and people get caught up in your warmth and your humor and all that stuff, and they just don't hear this is funny, but it has teeth. It's like the Jon Stewart thing, right? Like you can get caught up in the laughter and not realize, oh yeah, there's teeth, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and I think I think deep down I'm a frustrated wannabe stand-up comedian. Like I would never.
I would love to see you do stand-up.
Oh, dude, it is. One time when we're all together in a city, I'm going to find a comedy club and I'm just going to bomb, and we're going to celebrate it.
I would love that.
You know Rob Ryerson, right? Do you know Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rob says he feels a little draw toward that too. So.
Really?
Maybe we could all just take a turn. Just get up there and tell our best jokes.
I think I'm only funny in a church. It's like because church people have a really bad sense of humor, or they're really nice. So I think people are laughing to humor me 90% of the time, and I don't think I'm funny outside of the church.
Oh man. Oh, I think there's
I have magical powers inside. I have magical powers inside the sanctuary.
You ever tell a joke that you like? Usually, most of my stuff, like funny stuff, I just do on the fly.
Me too. I don't plan jokes. No, I don't.
When I plan a joke,
it's terrible.
It's horrible.
Anytime I try to be funny, it's not funny.
Right.
I can't ever think of a time where I tried to be funny and it was actually funny. It just comes on the fly.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but I don't know. I think maybe it's overthinking it.
Yeah,
or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, you formed this community, and now you're in the process of
leaving it,
sort of letting it go.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that been like for you? What led you? I know you've alluded to it. What led you to this decision, and what's that been like for you?
Yeah. Do you remember? Did you ever read Henry Cloud's book, Necessary Endings?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I went to one of Rob Bell's weekends out in.
When did you go?
I think it was like the spring of 15.
I went in Memorial Day weekend of 2012 when he was.
Okay. Yeah, I went out there and did the whole surfing thing. And,
yep, me too.
What town was that in? I just blanked.
Laguna.
Yeah, that was super fun. And he recommended Necessary Endings. So Necessary Endings is by Henry Cloud, the guy who wrote the Boundaries book. And basically he talks about everything ends. Everything ends. Relationships end, jobs end, everything comes to an end. And part of wisdom is recognizing when it's over. And he even flips it and says, even if you're a boss, everybody that works for you, at some time they need to go, like it ends. And how do you know when it's time to pull the plug on somebody? How do you know when, hey, this isn't going to get better? I just need to. And he says most of the time in life, we do that too late. We recognize too late, like, oh, I should have left like 4 years ago. And so part of it is I've been trying to play with that, but it also takes time, I think, to, you said up front that this is about alignment. It takes time to figure out what's in me and what's stirring. And I think that, do you know the Joseph Campbell Hero's Journey stuff at all? So like the Joseph Campbell stuff about we're always called to leave home. We're always called to be like Luke Skywalker and leave Tatooine, or Frodo and leave the Shire. And, but I think sometimes it takes us a while to hear the call. It takes us a while to realize that, this thing here is done. And so I've always had, a little bit of like, what would it be like to not be in ministry? What would it be like to not, the stuff we talked about in the beginning of the heartbreaks? What would it be like to do that? What would it be like to have, and especially as you get older, like, what would it be like to have a retirement fund?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Do you know what that's like?
What is retirement? I don't understand this term you're using.
401 something. I don't know what
those numbers never got to me, actually.
Yeah. And so, a couple years ago, I've always played with the idea of, and part of it's my understanding of call. I really struggle with, I've always struggled with the idea of what it means to be a vocational pastor at some level. It's what I've always said about being a pastor is that I'm not the pastor because I'm a special class of person. I don't believe that God somehow has this thing where like, oh, I'm calling you to be like the priests in Israel were a special class of people.
Right.
And I don't think about pastors like that. And I know that's not how most people think about it, and it's fine. I've always said the reason I'm the pastor is because the gifts I bring to the church, speaking and leadership, require 40 hours a week to get those things done. And so you all pay me a salary so I can preach well and I can lead well. And but the calling is not to some title or the nice office.
Right.
And so I've just wrestled the last couple of years with, a part of it is an Enneagram stuff. I'm a 3.
Okay.
And I'm motivated by like challenges. I kind of get ramped up by, I've run marathons and I've built 2 houses myself and started a church. I like big challenges. And so there's a part of me that's just had a growing sense of boredom and also just wrestling with all this stuff stirring in me. And so, about a year ago, I started just putting feet in the water and started asking about I have no marketable skills, let's be honest. Yeah, I would like to apply for your job. I can read Greek and Hebrew, and, you know.
Dude, listen,